Donate today to help preserve these lands and save future generations of wildlife.
Okay. Is it now Nicole?
Yeah, all right, we're on live now. So welcome everyone. My name is Nicole Preisel. I am Stalo from Lackamel First Nation, as well as mixed settler Canadian heritage, and I want to welcome you all here today to the Basics of Bird IDing with Kevin Bell. I am the Digital Communications Coordinator at Wild Bird Trust, and Leanne Payne, Executive Director, is also here. And yes, I just want to say that Wild Bird Trust is located on the unceded, ancestral, and traditional territories of the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. This has been their home since time immemorial, and Wild Bird Trust is committed to reconciliation and redress with the nation. And yes, and so I am so honored to be here with Kevin Bell, and Leanne, I'll let you introduce him.
Yep.
And yes, and welcome everyone.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, Nicole. Yes, so I'm the Executive Director of Wild Bird Trust. This is the start of a series. Our intention for 2021 is to have 8 or 9 monthly virtual events, one every Saturday at 11 a.m. and one every Thursday at 7 p.m. and then a special one on Sunday evenings. And so this inaugural event, which is a continuation of events we've been doing last year when the COVID lockdown hit, we switched a lot of our events to online to keep connected with you and keep sharing the information. So this workshop that Kevin is doing on the basics of bird IDing is sort of the start of a bird IDing and information series. And many of you are here probably because you know Kevin and his legacy, his deep knowledge as a local naturalist, ecologist, ornithologist, and as a former chief naturalist the manager at the Lynn Canyon Ecology Center, and also worked with the parks, and is a primary founder of Wild Bird Trust, was integral to making sure that the conservation area at Wild Bird Trust, the bird sanctuary, it has been maintained as the beautiful site that it is for birds, for deer, for bears, for the pollinators, for all of these living creatures. And as Nicole mentioned, we're working with Tsleil-Waututh to improve that relationship as well. So I'm really excited to learn more from Kevin. His knowledge is deep and vast, and we will not capture it all in this short session. So we may end up cutting off his presentation and going into a part 2 for another date because he has so much to share. So let's see how far we can get and include a conversation afterwards. So welcome, Kevin. Looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Leanne. So are we about to start?
Yes, please. You want to share your screen?
Ah, right. Share video, right?
That's right.
I have to say something. I'm clicking on it and nothing's happening.
Yes, again. In the very center, in the very center, the very bottom of your screen, it's a green button and it says share screen.
Oh, right. Thank you.
Yes. I know it's hard. We're all getting used to Zoom.
Oh, I hadn't heard of Zoom a year ago.
You're doing great.
Most of us too.
Now, can we get rid of, good, yes.
Looks beautiful. Looks great. Everyone can see it?
What about, is this a problem on the right?
No, it's all good.
No, we can't see it, just you.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this morning. And we were just talking about the Tsleil-Waututh and this being unceded land, and indeed going right back thousands of years the environment here on the west coast of Canada, indeed west coast of North America, is wet, and quite often very dark and dreary wet. And this has led to the development of these little falcons. These are called black Merlins or dark Merlins. And this is a subspecies that is adapted to fitting into the dark, drab weather that we have quite often on the west coast. These little birds are falcons. The male is about the size of a robin, and the female, the top right, is slightly bigger, but they are very vicious little falcons. They'll tackle bald eagles, drive them away from their nests. They fear no flying creature, and they are a delight to watch. They nest in old crows' nests, and on the north shore of North Vancouver, they will be flying around their nest in the evening, calling to just let everybody know that they are there at their nest and they won't stand any nonsense from no one. And it's quite interesting. They're among the houses on the North Shore in suburbia. Now, for people from other parts of the continent, I'm talking really here today about birds that one can see in and around Vancouver or southwestern BC. And it's amazing, even going down to Seattle, just over 100 miles south of us, the birds that you see in Seattle can be somewhat different. They're generally the same, but you will have one or two species that we may not have, or you may have them in greater numbers, or you may have them in lesser numbers. And of course, once you get down into Southern California, across to the East Coast or the prairies, the plains, very different species at this time of year. So I hope you can bear with us. This is very much a West Coast, southwestern BC species oriented, but the general principles of bird watching are the same everywhere. So moving on, if I can do it, yeah. We have grebes around the conservation area in winter. And these are the 4 species of grebe and a species of loon in the bottom left that you may see down at the off Maplewood in Burrard Inlet in winter. And the top right is the commonest one. It's called a horned grebe. And it in summer has nice yellow plumage, black, yellow, and red plumage, but winter it's pretty drab. But there it is. It's quite small. The one in the center is a western grebe, and we get those on migration in the fall, late summer, fall, and in the spring. Top left is a red-necked grebe, and you can see it just doesn't have a red neck in the wintertime, but in the summer, in breeding plumage, it does. Bottom left is a red-throated loon. These are quite rare in Burrard Inlet now. There used to be winter here in small numbers, but unfortunately we had a couple of oil spills 20 years ago, and it seemed to remove the red-throated loon, and they've never come back really. The bottom right is a pied-billed grebe, and it is a freshwater grebe, but it will be found in saltwater in the winter when freshwater freezes up. So these are not ducks. They don't have web feet. They have very large feet that are lobed. Looking at the birds of winter, the top left is a varied thrush, which is our western sort of robin. And it lives in old growth, nests in old growth forest. And old, 70, 80-year-old forest plus. This is a male eating cotoneaster berries. The birds on the right are a black turnstone at the back and a sanderling in front of it. Bottom right is a dunlin. These 3 birds are shorebirds, and they're in winter plumage. And we will be looking at all of these species in a bit more depth. And on the left-hand side, of course, are 2 species of swallow. the barn swallow on the very left, and then a cliff swallow in the center left. Both species are decreasing in number drastically in the last 20 years, as are the shorebirds, which is a great pity. And of course, the reasons for these decreases are human beings, unfortunately, and what we do to the environment. Generally, it's a lack of insects, lack of nesting sites, pesticides in the food chain, and now we have beautiful climatic roasting, which is taking place. Hopefully that will be on a certain new president's agenda. Bird watching has become very popular in the last 20 years, 25 years, which is really good. Now, this is a group of bird watchers in England where bird watching is really a big deal. And these people have turned up to see a rare bird. And you can see that it's not just one or two of them, there's quite a few. Depending on the bird, you can get this sort of thing. Can you imagine being part of that crowd looking at again, this is probably England, and they're probably looking at a rare bird from North America or from Asia. And of course, if you're a farmer and you have a rare bird on your land, you really don't want all these people tromping over your fields, destroying your farmland. So generally now they keep rarities a secret. Luckily, here in the West Coast, we still have small groups at best going out to look at rarities, maybe 25 max. And one of the things about bird watching is you can do it with very little equipment. Here we have a friend of mine called Larry, and he's got a pair of binoculars and a spotting scope. And the spotting scope is good for out on mud flats or water, inlets, ocean, sea, looking out to sea from land, across the prairies probably. But once you get in forests, spotting scope really isn't much use. Good pair of binoculars, very useful. And now they're producing binoculars. The optics are just amazing. In fact, I was talking to somebody the other day and thinking, you can probably get a 12 by 45, 48, 12 by 50 pair of binoculars. And a few years ago, they would be very heavy. And now they're getting so light. It's amazing. It's almost a really good investment, looking at a good pair of binoculars. So here around Vancouver, these are a few of the sort of posters and leaflets that have been put out. A lot of people feed birds. And this is an idea of some of the things that here in the Lower Mainland you can get at your feeder. And it can be quite a few birds. You can see on the right-hand side is a poster. I'm not going to name all those, but on the left, center left, Project Feeder Watch is a citizen science program where you can join, and it's Bird Study Canada, or Canada Birds, and they do a really you fill in once a month, once a week, what you see at your feeder, and this gives you an idea of the sort of things. You've got Downy Woodpeckers and Harrier Woodpeckers, and you've got northern flickers and 2 species of nuthatches, depending on where you live on the West Coast. For example, Vancouver, you won't get the white-breasted nuthatch, but in other places on the West Coast, you will. And again, to look at some of the jays on the top right, Steller's jay is a very definite West Coast bird. Blue jay is rare, but it just creeps into the very eastern side of BC from the prairies. And of course, we have robins, and we have fairy thrush, and we have starlings, and we have evening grosbeaks. We have chickadees. So many people, when they start bird watching, are a bit flummoxed. They say, well, I saw this bird, and it was a little brown bird. or a little brown gray bird. And this is just a look at a few of the little brown gray birds that you can see in this area in winter. So one of the things to look at is when you're going quietly, and now when you're bird watching, don't walk fast. Walk nice and slowly. Stop and listen and watch. People go out for a walk and they will say, well, I was out for a walk. I saw no birds. Not a bird. First of all, they're walking fast. Two, they're looking down all the time at their feet or the trail right in front of them. So, of course, they're not going to see anything but the trail, their feet. And unless the bird flies into them, they're not going to see it. So when you're bird watching, you walk very slowly. You stop regularly and just listen and look. And the other thing you do is you don't wear bright clothing. You wear somber clothing, dark clothing. Generally, this means browns, grays, blues, but not bright blues. Dark colors. And you move slowly and you don't make sun movements. You don't yell and shout. I know that I used to do school tours and I used to have to really tell the kids to stay quiet because kids love to yell and shout. But if they do that, they won't see much. Now, the birds we're looking at here are, in the top left is a little Bewick's wren. And then beside it, to its right, is a bush tit. And right center top is a Pacific winter wren, singing its heart out. The miniature woodpecker on the right is in fact a brown creeper, and it isn't related to woodpeckers at all, but it's very small. It's about the size of a mouse, and it creeps up tree trunks. Bottom left is a pair of golden crowned kinglets. The bird's lower center bird is a ruby crowned kinglet, and you can just see the ruby on the top of the crown. It only shows the ruby crown when it's agitated. Now, the lower right is a bird called a Hutton's Vireo, and it's just found in this part of British Columbia, southwestern BC, and as you go further south, it gets a lot commoner, I hope. It's certainly not an easy bird to find here on the North Shore, North Vancouver. Certain areas it exists. It seems to like a mix of older conifers, Doug firs, cedars, hemlocks, and deciduous, big leaf maples and cottonwoods, alders. So strange enough, it's just found in those areas. But you go down to California and it's in a totally different type of vegetation habitat down there. So, and it's a lot commoner as you go south. We have in the summer a number of swallow species that can be found around the flats. And some of them come and breed in this area, others migrate through. So the top left is the good old barn swallow. And those have they do breed on the North Shore in North Vancouver, but they certainly have taken a nosedive in their populations in the last 20 years. They've decreased. And again, the reasons are probably insects being poisoned by insecticides, pesticides. And this applies to all of these species. The top center is the tree swallow, possibly our commonest swallow on the North Shore. Nests in nest boxes and cavities in trees, cavities in rock walls. And it is a beautiful little swallow. Top right is one called a bank swallow. It migrates through, and it doesn't breed on the coast here in British Columbia. Breeds in the interior, in holes in sandy banks. And they breed in colonies, and they also have taken the nosedive. Bottom left is a cliff swallow. As the name suggests, they breed by building their nests on cliffs with mud. They make beautiful nests. We'll have a look at some of these later. Cliff swallows, again, have been decimated. Unfortunately, 30 years ago, there were colonies at Simon Fraser University, University of British Columbia, and the Vancouver Museum, and they hosed them down because the droppings created a health hazard. And those colonies were totally wiped out. Now, it's a great pity that that happened, and it shouldn't have happened, because there should have been another solution. In the center is a rough-winged swallow. We have a couple of pairs nesting at Maplewood, probably in the barge channel. They put their nests in the bank. They drill a hole in the bank and nest in that. And on the lower right are violet green swallows. This violet green swallows are our West Coast swallow, found really in the whole mountain ranges of the West. And they are very beautiful swallow, and they nest in cavities. Again, like a tree swallow, they will nest in cavities and nest boxes. So there are swallows, and they, of course, are summer visitors, returning in March and leaving this part of the world in August, late August and early September. We have woodpeckers. Again, these are the birds, these species are ones found in this area. And the left-hand side is the red-breasted sapsucker, which is something of a name that comedians quite often latch on to, because it's so red-breasted sapsucker. It sounds so weird. Anyway, what these birds do is they drill holes in the bark of deciduous trees, and they drink the sap that comes out, or they eat the insects that are attracted to the sap. And these sap wells also attract hummingbirds and house finches and quite a few other small birds that eat the insects or drink the sap. In the center, we have the Harrier and Downy Woodpecker. The top center is suet, and we've got two species of woodpecker there. On the left is the hairy woodpecker, about the size of a robin, and on the right is the little Downy Woodpecker. Both of these are males because they've got the red marking on the head. And really the easiest way to tell these apart, size, when you have them together, size is obvious. But when you have them on their own, the size can be a bit harder to judge. And there's a way to tell by the length of the beak, which we will look at in a few seconds. Bottom center are females of the two species. The left-hand side is the hairy and the right is the downy. And of course, on the right, we have a hairy woodpecker male. So we'll move on and see. Here is the way to tell little darlings apart. So as you can see, the length of the head, the beak, to the length of the head gives you a good idea. With the Downy woodpecker, the beak is really small compared to the size of the head. The hairy woodpecker on the right, the beak is almost the same length as the head. So that's the surefire way to try and identify the two apart if you have them on their own. Now, the commonest one in this part of Vancouver is the Downy woodpecker, but I have friends living in Burnaby and various other parts of the lower mainland here, and the hairy woodpecker is the commonest. So again, it's probably a habitat situation and maybe the amount of rainfall, because here on the North Shore, beside the mountains, we get 80 to 90 inches of rain a year. If you go out to White Rock, it's down to 25, 30 inches. So White Rock is a lot drier overall than the North Shore. A lot of people like that. So here we are with look at some more nice woodpeckers. The Downy on the left, Downy in the center, and then a Harrier on the right. And these are all males because they have that red marking. Since the Second World War, there have been a lot of field guides. And this is one of the first ones put out in the 40s, late 40s, Audubon guide to Western, Eastern, and Central North America. There was one for Western North America for land birds, and then there was a water bird guide. And this is a good guide for the, you go back and you look at it, and it, good illustrations, good field, but unfortunately the names change. Possibly the most famous field guides put out were by this man, Roger Tori Peterson. He put out a guide to the birds of Eastern North America first, back in the 40s, and then he put out a field guide to Western birds. And he came up with a very interesting way of identifying birds, which we'll talk about. Today, this is the guide that many bird watchers in North America use. It's the Sibley Field Guide to Birds of Western North America, or you can buy a sort of combined Eastern and Western North America edition. There are others, of course. There's an updated Peterson Field Guide to Western Birds. In that whole series of Peterson Field Guides, you can get the Advanced Birding Field Guide. And all of these guides generally you can get them on apps as well. And they also have bird songs, which is very useful on the apps, so that's worth it. The other thing that Peterson came up with was this, silhouettes of birds. And this is an excellent idea. If you're traveling on the highway or by rail, by train, you will see birds out of the window, not if you're driving. Bird watching and driving really ain't a good idea. Although I know myself and a few others of my friends, you see something flying across the highway and you go, oh my God, it's a Cooper's hawk. And you go, oh, there's a truck ahead of me. You got to watch. You can't really do that. It's dicing a bit with death. However, if you have passengers or kids, good way to occupy the kids is get them to try and identify birds as they're driving along the highway. And these silhouettes really give you a nice helping guide to that. Because many birds, you can tell what they are just by the silhouettes. So, the Eastern and Western silhouettes, and they're all numbered. They're on the inside. This is the Eastern one, but, the one we just looked at was Western. In flight or near water, if you're by the ocean, the highways by the ocean, by a lake, by marshes. These are the marsh, freshwater and saltwater birds you could see. And of course, in flight, every bird has a different silhouette, wing shape, tail shape, beak length, flight pattern, undulating, straight, glide, soar. So flight patterns are very interesting and very good way to help identify birds without even getting the color. There's a special field guide on hawks that's put out by the Peterson Field Guide series. And again, it looks at it describes each hawk or falcon found in North America. But it also gives you these flight silhouettes. And as you can see, the shape of the wings and the tail, look at the left-hand side, those are beauty hawks on the left. And then if you look underneath them, we have accipiters. These are sharp-shinned Coopers and goshawks, rounded wings and long tails. And then we go up to the top right, and they are kites. Now, in this part of North America, Vancouver, we really don't have kites. So if you live here, they're harriers. We do have a harrier. Top right are harriers, and we have northern harriers, one species. And they generally like open grassland areas, marshes. Beautiful to watch hunting. Then we have the kites. Now, you have to go down into Washington State before you get kites on the West Coast. And beneath those, we have falcons. As you can see, the shape of the wings and the tail is quite different. The falcons and the kites have very pointed wings, but the falcons are much faster and they have the tail that is much more how do I call it, streamlined, and yes, falcons just are not going to be confused with kites. The kite that we have is, we don't have it, it's in Washington State and further south. It's black and white and slow moving generally, and is, yeah, very distinctive from a falcon. But you can see these silhouettes can set that up. Now, when we come to, here is a look at the northern harrier flight silhouettes in more detail. And you can see it's quite a range. But harriers really are distinctive birds when you're watching them hunting over a field or over a marsh. And they actually will come quite close to you too. Shorebirds very definitely have very different silhouettes. And of course, one of the things with shorebirds is the great division is between the plovers, top left-hand side, short little stubby beak, and the sandpipers, which have longer, thinner beaks. The sandpipers are a big family, and they range in size from birds smaller than a sparrow to birds as big and bigger than crows or ravens. They're a very diverse family, the sandpipers. The plovers, not as many of them, but they're very distinctive when you see them. They tend to have very distinctive patterned plumage. But as you notice, I haven't really talked about the color of the plumage of the birds or the feathers, because that is a small part of identification. It's all these other things, the shape of the beak, the length of the legs, how it behaves, how it flies. And you can see the bottom left, the beak shape, the bill shape shows you how they feed. And bottom right of that group of beaks or bills, bottom right is a curlew, then is just above it is a godwit, then we have a dowitcher, and if you move over to the center birds there, we have a very needle-like little beak, and that's various birds like the sandpipers and the yellowlegs. Then we have a plover-like little short beak. We have the dunlins, long, slightly curved beak. And of course, we have the little top left, we have the willet's beak. So these are all for feeding in mud, sand, or like sort of soft, gooey earth. And they are, of course, after various types of insects, insect larvae, worms, crustaceans. And each bird gets its food from a different depth in the mud. Again, this is a look at these beaks in more detail. And there is a wide variety of these beaks to look at. And this is one of the things, if you're moving quietly through a marsh or along the shore and not frightening the birds away, being quiet, slow moving, you'll get a look at these beaks in much more detail. And it is an interesting thing to do. If you're out on the prairies in the spring, the potholes or the marsh potholes, just fantastic for looking at some of these birds. Or on the west coast, open west coast in migration time. So we have little peeps. These are basically peeps. And here we have two species of peeps. The bird on the right is a Baird's sandpiper, named after Mr. Baird. And it is slightly bigger and longer in body length than the western sandpipers to the left. But they flock together, and these show up in our area in August and September, and again in May when they're coming north. And again, if you're sitting quietly on the shore, sitting on a log, they'll quite often come very close. Here we have the same little birds. On the left is the bird sandpiper, on the right the western sandpiper. There is another species called a semi-palmated sandpiper, which and least sandpipers. So there are 4 of these little peeps that show up. Now these are yellow legs. As you can see, they do have yellow legs. And the bird on the left is a greater yellow legs, and the other 2 are lesser yellow legs. And the point here is, of course, that the greater is bigger, it has a thicker beak, the beak is very slightly upturned, while the lesser's beak is straight, more needle-like, and the lessers are smaller. The other thing to remember on this part of the world is that graters are common almost throughout the year, except in the summertime. Greater yellowlegs can be found generally through the fall, winter, and spring in this area. Lesser yellowlegs tend to migrate through in May and also in late August, September, but they don't generally hang around for the winter. Neither of these species breed here. They all breed in the interior of North America, in the northern interior. And having a look at the beaks, you can see that on the left, the greater yellowleg's beak is very much longer than the head length. The lesser is a much shorter beak and not much longer than the head length. And this is one way to sort those out. On the right is a spotted sandpiper, at the top right. Now, spotted sandpipers, you don't even have to really look at the beak to identify it. It does a lot of bobbing, and generally it shows up. It's a very small sandpiper. It teeters on rocks. It moves its tail and body up and down, and it's quite distinctive in that way. Willet on the right is a rare bird in this southwestern part of British Columbia. We're lucky if we have one a winter or 2, and willets do get commoner down on the coast. I think of Washington, certainly Oregon, and of course California. So it's very much larger bird and very distinctive wing patterns. So there you are. These are all sandpipers. And on the left, we have a group of greater yellowlegs. And you can see that there is quite a lot of variation in the plumage, whether it's breeding in the front or winter at the rear. The wing patterns are different. And yellowlegs all have the same wing pattern, but this is a distinctive situation. The other thing about yellowlegs is that they have a very distinctive rump, white rump. And on the bottom right here, you can see a bird that doesn't have a white rump. And let us know that that's not a yellowleg. That is another species of sandpiper. And I hate to tell you this, but I've forgotten which one it is. So we will find out. Moving on. Sandpipers are, as I say, a very diverse group of birds. The best time to see them here is in the spring, April, May, early June, as they're moving north to the tundra and the boreal forest to nest, or the mountains, the northern mountains. They most of them go to Alaska, Yukon, northern British Columbia, and of course the whole northern part of Canada, right across to the east coast, to Labrador. And then, so these birds all move north to take advantage of the vast numbers of insects that hatch out in the northern tundra in the summertime. And on the left, we have an interesting little group. We have on the extreme left a surf bird. Then we have long-billed dowitchers, top right, 2 of them, and they're in breeding plumage. The bird bang in the middle, the big bird, is a marbled godwit. And then around it, I think there's another dowitcher behind it, and a stilt sandpiper on the lower left, and there's a couple more dowitchers sleeping. Actually, I think they're all dowitchers around that model godwit. So this is one group. On the top right, we have this interesting group of birds that hang out on rocks and rocky coasts. The bird in the middle is a black-bellied plover. It likes to hang out actually in mudflats and marshes, but it will hang out along a rocky shore. This one is obviously on a rocky shore area. On its right is a wandering tattler. This is a bird that you really have to go out to an area where there are a lot of rocks, surf is piling in against the rocks. That's what the tattler likes. And the bird on the extreme left is a surf bird, and likewise, it likes that sort of habitat as well. So if you go to the west coast of Vancouver Island, rocky west coast of Washington, these are species to watch for, along with the birds in flight in the lower right. And here we have black turnstones, which are the bird in the very lower part right, with the white on the wings and the white rump, and the white going up the back is a black turnstone. The other birds above it are surf birds, and then there is a small bird right in the center lower, and that probably is a rock sandpiper. So the way to identify these birds is by the pattern, the wing pattern and the rump and tail pattern. And the color is almost not much help. The pattern of the wings and the rump is a big help, unless you've got a really good view like the bird from top right. One of the things to learn is the topography of birds.
Sorry, Kevin, I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm just going to give you a 5-minute heads up. We're just going to, yeah, perfect. Awesome. Okay, so 5 minutes in. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nicole. That's just great. That's yeah. I get going and I forget the time.
I've been so enthralled. I'm like, oh my god.
Nicole. Thank you for reminding me. I asked her to remind me. So this is an interesting little project for when you have all that time in your hands as we battle the virus. This topography of a bird is very useful, especially if you're reading a bird book and it's talking about the various parts of a bird. The other thing is on the right, this book says how to identify birds, and on the bottom left, of course, it talks about whether a bird is accidental, casual, introduced, exotic, or if it breeds in the area. So these are all things that bird books can tell you. Now, this slide looks at a little group, 2 birds. The purple finch, which is on the left, and the lower left is a male purple finch. You can see it's got a purplish back, big, thick beak. This is a sparrow. It looks like a sparrow. And these finches eat the seeds out of the berries. On the west coast, they really like Pacific crabapple. And the females, which are the commonest plumage you'll see, you see a group of half a dozen of these birds, you'll probably find that most of them look like the females, which are sparrow-like. The pair in the center, top center, the lower one is the female. You see it has very distinctive white eye stripe, and it has very distinctive white underneath the eye as well. These birds spend their time quietly eating the seeds out of Pacific crabapple, holly berries, hawthorn berries, any sort of berry that has seed. They all have seed in them. These are seed predators in the wintertime. On the right hand side here, we have a pair of house finches. And this is the bird that comes to feeders in suburban, urban areas, or indeed anywhere that seed is put out for birds. And they're very similar looking. And I think the next slide, yes, the next slide, let's have a much better look at house finches. House finches on the right, you see the males have this nice red breast. Females are, again, like the female purple finch, but they don't have the eye stripe. So these are interesting history. Originally, the house finches were found in the southwest Arizona, that sort of open, arid country, and Southern California. But with suburbia and the expansion of suburbia, gardens, etc., and people feeding birds, they have now moved as far north as Prince George in central British Columbia, where they're summer visitors. So this little bird has benefited big time from human beings. And one of the things that it nests around houses, and of course it has a red breast. And human beings have a weakness for birds with red breasts. So I think we will cease and desist. I hope it hasn't, again, I would remind people from areas other than the Vancouver or Canada's banana belt, as we like to call it. Where you live, you will have different birds, possibly, and a whole different situation. But when you're bird watching, quiet, slow moving, stopping, looking, listening, and you can get apps of all of these books that I was recommending. So, hey, there you are.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Kevin. That was amazing. I love listening to you every time. I mean, there's so much to learn, but I always learn something. And so, yeah, I really appreciate that. I hope everyone else did too. Yes, I see some clapping hands. Awesome. So we're about to move into a Q&A session. So if you have any questions, kind of begin to think of them. You can either type them out in the chat. If you're comfortable, you can always unmute yourself. But for a little moment here, we're just going to do a quick poll. We just want to see who all is in the room. So I'm going to be launching these. It should pop up on your screen and just fill them out. There's a few of them. And yeah, and Leanne is going to be putting some links also in the chat as well. Nice. Sweet. Yeah, Facebook is a really popular platform. That's great. Yeah. No, Kevin, thank you. It was so cool. And I didn't know that about the I can't remember the name of the last bird you were talking about, but how
House finches.
Yes, how they used to just be in this, one area or at least lower down and all the way to Prince George. That is just wild, but so interesting. All right, perfect.
Yes, there are birds that have benefited from us and other birds have suffered. And the house finches definitely benefited from our activities.
Yeah, and I've just shared the iNaturalist Eventbrite link, which is happening this Thursday night at 7 p.m. And then the following Saturday is our winter volunteer orientation session. So I think that's, did I do it? Did it happen? Oh, maybe I haven't pressed send yet. Not sure what's going on here. There we go. Oh, maybe I did it twice, the same one.
So the next time we'll start with the house finch.
Yes.
And sort of revise the house finch and move on to other species. Yeah.
We'll definitely have to have more of these because, obviously so many people are interested and there's so much to cover. So yeah, that'd be great. All right.
I'll check in on the folks on Facebook and just see if there's any questions there as well.
Perfect. I'm just going to keep launching these pollings. We're almost done. We just have 2 more questions, everyone. And thank you so much for your participation in this. It really just helps us know what kind of programming to be putting out, how to, you know, get it out to the public and all of that. So yeah, we definitely appreciate that. And that's awesome. This is a first event for so many people. That is so cool. So welcome. We appreciate you
Hey.
being here.
Welcome, welcome.
Awesome.
And there's no questions yet from the Facebook folks, but an appreciation from Julia Downs saying excellent presentation.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Lots of appreciations in the chat too.
Okay, and we're just gonna do our last question and then we'll move on to Q&A. So hopefully everyone has started to think of some questions, and you don't have to ask any, so don't worry about that. But for anyone that, you know, is kind of going over that presentation in their head, I know I definitely was trying to write some down as I was listening because, yeah, it's such good information.
The questions about the Facebook link, is that regarding the next events rather than just the Eventbrite ones? Is just making sure I'm understanding the question. Fred, is it Fred? Freddie? Yeah. Is it where we got Freddie waiting?
All right,
Yep.
so
Okay.
I'm just gonna end the polling and then we'll move on to the Q&A. Perfect. Okay. So, yeah, Leanne, do you have a question?
I don't have any question on
Oh, just the Facebook link. Yeah, so just to remind everyone, if you guys missed it, we will be sending out both the link to the Facebook Live as well as a link to the YouTube video once we upload it, which will be hopefully a bit later today. And so you guys can come back and rewatch this whole presentation and kind of go to any parts that you might have missed or any information that you really wanted to write down. So no worries there. Yeah, so that should be coming to you hopefully a bit later today. And then on our Facebook page, if you want to follow us there, the Facebook Live is usually uploaded right after this ends. So yeah, and we post both our events on Facebook, as many of you guys found us through, which is awesome, as well as Eventbrite and Instagram. So yeah, okay. Let's see. Okay. So I'm gonna go up a little bit and just see if I missed any. Oh, okay, this is a good one to start with. Kevin, do you recommend any certain type of binoculars?
Yes, very, as a politician would say, that's a very good question. I'm so glad you asked that question. Really, all I can say on that is get 10 magnification by 45 or 50 and hunt around. The last pair of binoculars I bought about 2-3 years ago, I came across in London Drugs, which is for those of people south of the border, it's a drugstore, and it sells all sorts of stuff. And I went to the counter, the camera optics counter, and here they had a pair of 10 by 45 binoculars made by Zeiss, German company, Zeiss binoculars, and they had them on special. So I got them for, I believe it was about 300, 400 bucks. I can't remember exactly, but it was a deal. It was a good deal. And you know, if you're buying binoculars, you don't sort of think, oh, I should go to the drugstore. But in fact, that's the thing, to hunt around, look at other possibilities. I mean, there are places you can buy binoculars and scopes online, and they are quite expensive. Whereas if you go and check out, and the thing is, you can try them when you're you know, even at this time with the horrible virus, they should probably let you try them out in the store, and you can focus and so forth and get to know those binoculars. certainly checking out, checking out the information on online is a good idea. Google binoculars for bird watching, and you'll get some good advice, I would imagine. But I would not go for anything under 10 magnification. Because then when you're out in an open area looking across fields or mud flats or water, lakes, ocean, whatever, 8 magnification just isn't really doing it. You've got 10 magnification, it really helps. And in fact, I'm even thinking now of going, if I buy another pair before I toddle off this mortal coil, I'll go for 12 or 15, because they are getting a lot lighter. The technology is advancing, and what 20 years ago would have been massively huge, heavy binoculars, 12 and 15 magnification ain't so heavy now. And it's pretty good for those. The other thing to watch is closeness of magnification. If you can keep the binoculars in focus 4 or 5 feet from you, that's very useful. But when you're in the forest, anyway, there you go.
Oh, that's good. That's great. Yeah, no, I think that's a great question.
Yeah, it was a great, it was a great question.
I would not know where to start.
No,
So this is another great question. It's by Jasmine. So as beginners going outdoors, how would we begin to ID birds? So do we learn them by category, location, size? I think that's a great question, because many of us are beginners.
The best thing, if you have a garden or a balcony and can feed small birds, that is one of the best ways to start, because you can stand at a window and get really good views of your local small birds coming to a feeder. And the other thing to do is to check out, probably with a good bird book, what you might expect coming to your local feeder. For example, if you live on the prairies, you're going to get a totally different bunch of birds coming to your feeder in the fall, winter, than somebody here in Vancouver or somebody on the coast of Southern California. It's just different species in different areas. But if you familiarize yourself with your local common birds, whether they be house sparrows or song sparrows, spotted towies, Anna's hummingbirds, whatever, those small birds are the ones that you want to get to know first. And then, you always, what a crow is, and you know what a gull is. Well, gulls, we will be hitting in the next presentation, hopefully. Gulls are worth checking out. The big gulls are in this part of the world are generally glaucous winged gulls. But if you're on the coast of Washington, they are western gulls. And if you're around the Puget Sound, Salish Sea, there are a lot of hybrid gulls, which are a mixed marriage situation between western gulls and glaucous winged gulls. And they are interesting to identify. But they look quite often like herring gulls, which is another species we get in the winter. And that can be difficult. Anyway, get to know your local birds.
Yes. And I would always say, like, as someone who, just started doing this, starting with just 1 or 2, pick 2 of your favorite and learn everything about them. Like, what do they like to eat? Where are they found? Any of that kind of stuff. How do they sound, right? And
yeah, that's right. Get the songs.
Exactly.
Apps, there are good apps for those. The other thing is, say you're sitting in you're sitting outdoors at Starbucks or one of the other fast food outlets. Quite often you'll find small birds are there to pick up the crumbs. Quite often they're house sparrows, but they could be house finches, white crowned sparrows, golden crowned sparrows. Worth checking those, and you get good views of them when you're sitting, sucking your coffee or hot chocolate or whatever it is, and they're just hopping around at your feet. So anywhere you are, it's worth just checking the small birds you can see. When it comes to larger birds, try to go, for example, with on a guided walk. And I know at this time of year that's not happening because of the deer virus. Hopefully, by late summer, fall next year, we'll be having guided walks, and throughout North America, they'll be back at various sanctuaries and conservation areas. And that's really through local natural history societies, Audubon societies, whatever. And that's a good way. Go with a group, a small group of people, maybe 10, 15, and you'll find a number of people who are like yourself starting bird watching or have been doing it for maybe 2 or 3 years, and some people have been doing it for a lot longer. And they'll certainly give you a good help to identify the local water birds and larger birds, etc. Yeah.
Very cool. Just really quickly from Carolyn, I've heard different things about feeding birds. Should we do it or not? I think that's a good question, because I'm also sometimes confused on that myself.
Yeah, feeding birds is the thing to do is buy food specifically for wild birds. Black oil sunflower seeds are really useful, and millet. In fact, those two things are very good to feed wild birds: black oil sunflower and millet. Now, if you can buy suet of some sort, a lot of stores sell that. You can hang that up outside your window, and you'll get a lot of small birds coming to eat suet. The thing about bread is interesting. Your basic white bread is not good food for birds. But if you have a loaf of heavy whole wheat multi-grained rough bread, that is acceptable because it's got a lot of the grains and so forth in it. White stodgy, white bread you can take into your hand and mold into a ball, like a small, you take the center of the loaf and you can actually roll it into a ball. That's not good stuff for birds. It's actually not very good for you either. But yeah, the rougher the bread, the better. And when I say rough, I mean whole wheat, multi-grain. Yeah, but I would definitely go for black oil sunflower seeds, millet, and suet. Best things. Yeah.
Nice.
And yeah.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
And they need the food. Birds actually need the food when it's cold weather. That is ice, snow, sub-zero. On the west coast here, we have not really had really cold weather this winter. We've had just about freezing, but day like today, there are probably insects out. It's mild enough that there could be insects out flying around, and even the Anna's hummingbirds will be eating those insects. Birds can make it through with weather like this in the winter. It's when it's sub-zero that they really need food.
That's a really good point, I think, to make, is that, yeah, you want obviously wild animals to be foraging for their own food, but definitely when the weather is really hard, that is always sometimes a good time to be putting those bird feeders out, those hummingbird feeders. Yeah, perfect. So this question was kind of already answered by someone in the chat, but I'm just going to ask you, Kevin, if you have any recommendations. So looking at various apps, any recommendations? This person said Smart ID, Merlin Bird ID by Cornell Lab, Obden.
I would go with the Cornell and also Sibley, Cornell, Sibley. We should shop around. I'm not a great app person, so I generally still use bird books. But I've seen my friends have Sibley, and they also have the Cornell, and those are very good. But I mean, just check it out. Sometimes, I'm not sure, but some places they may have more localized apps. I would imagine if one is living in somewhere like New York, California, big population centers, you'll probably find that there are some apps that are almost tailored for your area. And that can be a help in that somebody has ruled out the things you're not going to see. For example, here in southwestern BC, we're not going to see certain species of birds, which you're going to see in California. Well, they're going to be very rare. We might, you know, I'm just trying to think of something here on the coast. Avocets, American avocets. Well, they have shown up once in 10 years. We get an avocet, but you know, to have it, it might, a local app might not sort of include that. But I mean, it's in most Western field guides. And the other thing about field guides is they are a guide. Again, Roger Tori Peterson, the man who sort of the grandfather of birding since the Second World War, he was asked about bird books and how they didn't exactly show the right plumage color or something. And he said, well, don't forget, it's called a field guide. It's a guide. It's not 100%. There's a certain variation that it cannot show you. The other thing that Peterson did, he used to put little black lines to show you the point, the area that identified the bird. That's really worth following up on. Yeah.
Very cool. I think on field guides, I did see some people ask, is there any books that you might recommend? I know you did say some in your presentation, but are there any particular ones that you love?
Sibley is the best one at the moment, and he has an app. Sibley's Field Guide. I don't know if you can actually see this. Is that coming across?
Yep, that's coming across. Perfect.
Yeah. So this is the current Bible of bird watching, but every 10 years or so, somebody else comes along with a new Bible. So actually, the field guides, I think since the Second World War in North America, there have been probably at least 10 different field guides published. And each one has its good points and its weaknesses, but they're all out there. I mean, the other thing about bird watching is it doesn't need to cost you an arm and a leg. If you go to a large secondhand bookstore, you can quite often find field guides very easily on offer at very reasonable prices. And the other, I don't know how many of you have done this, but if you go to a pawn shop and you're trying to find a pair of binoculars, again, you might pick up a bargain. I've had friends who've gone to pawn shops and walked away with scopes and binoculars.
Flea markets too.
Flea markets, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
garage sales. My dad gets tons of binoculars from garage sales.
Yeah.
Very cool. Thank you. I saw Christy, you guys held up one of your books. That's awesome. I love seeing that. So I think we'll maybe just do one or two more questions. If you have any and you've been waiting to ask them in chat, or you can just unmute yourself. No worries there. I will just lead off. I saw this up here. I can't remember who said it. Crows and ravens, how do we differentiate them? I think that's a great one because we see them so much here on the West Coast, but they are different once you get to know them.
Oh, yes. Basically, crudely put, a raven is almost twice as big as a crow. So it's big. Ravens are very big, and they have very big beaks, and they also have a beard underneath the beak. They actually have a beard of feathers, and they croak. They generally hang out in 2s, 3s, maybe 4, not generally more than that. Crows, small, very, when I say small, I mean, they're a medium-sized bird, but they are very vocal, and they call and talk, and they're in big flocks. But of course, if you're at a fast food outlet, that pair of crows, they're not in a big flock, but they're not ravens are. How can I put this? Ravens aren't. They're almost chicken-sized, you know. almost the size of a farmyard chicken. And the
Definitely.
beak is massive. And crows hate them,
Yeah,
just hate them.
they're not friends. They're not
No, they're
friends.
not. No.
No.
And if you're
What-
driving along a highway, quite often you'll see crows feeding on old kill and ravens. Ravens quite often along highways.
Yeah, and the beak is a little bit more curved
Yeah,
on a
the end of
raven.
it points down, but it's like, I would say it's almost twice the size of a crow's beak. It's
Mm-hmm.
a massive beak. It's deep, long, and you don't want to mess with
Exactly.
that bird.
Yeah, ravens are one of my favorite birds, so I absolutely love
Highly
them.
intelligent, very
are.
intelligent.
And their different calls are
Oh yes,
so complex. They have
they
one
talk
that's
to each other.
underwater. Yeah,
Crows and ravens, they actually talk to each other. They have complex communication systems, and they have very complex social order. There's a top pair. There's a pair of crows that is the number one pair. If you like the king and queen, I don't know. So it's, yeah, they have very society structures, social structures. And ravens are likewise, they're very smart.
yeah. Before we answer the last two questions in the chat, Leanne here is just gonna do a quick little presentation, just so we, because I know there was a few people during the polls that were maybe interested in volunteering. So just before we get to those last questions, I'm gonna get Leanne to talk right now.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Nicole. Thanks, Kevin, for a great presentation and good questions. Loving the conversation.
I just had to let the cat in.
Yeah, yeah. Don't let them go get the birds.
Yeah.
Yes, the next volunteer orientation online is following the next Saturday, 11 a.m. I did include the link to the Facebook and the event right in the chat. And we'll also include those in the follow-up email that follows this event with the link to today's presentation in case you came in halfway or got kicked out by mistake because of our limit. So the volunteer orientation is, we try and hold those once every couple of months to help do some intake. We have lots of opportunities for our members to get involved actively, whether it's remote from your home so that you're safe if you have other situations, or on site safely. There are lots of activities that we have. There are committees that you can join that have meetings online to go through. And so the volunteer orientation will review our mandate, bit of background on the Wild Bird Trust history and our priorities, our values, what we're prioritizing in the next year, some of the projects that we already have underway that you might want to learn more about and find out how to get involved. Marissa, who's our assistant restoration and site manager, and she'll probably be assisted by Alejandro, our new restoration and site manager, will be conducting the webinar. And they have an intake process, they have job descriptions, and lots of information about what's happening right now, and an intake process. And they're also developing training elements so that you can, even if you don't have all the knowledge coming into the roles, we'll give you safety information, but we'll also create programs that you can build your skills and knowledge over time. So it's a great way to get to know others that are involved in this good work.
Yeah.
And yeah, so
Awesome. Yeah, and just this past week, myself and a volunteer, we set up our annual photography exhibit. So there are really like cool and interesting projects you can get involved with us. And obviously get a little sneak peek at some awesome stuff behind the scenes. So yeah, so I'm just gonna ask, thank you, Leanne. And I'm just gonna ask maybe one or two last questions, and then we'll sign off. So let me just get the chat back up. So I did see something. Okay, let's see. So I really like the Birds of Southwestern British Columbia Little Guide published by Heritage House. It's a local and specific for birds common in this area. Thank you. That's a great tip for other people. So Kimberly wrote, we have been recommending taking feeders down in regards to bad salmonella outbreak in pine siskins right now. What are your thoughts on this?
That's a good idea. At the moment, we're having a pine siskin year. So there are a great number of flocks of pine siskins around. And unfortunately, feeders can spread this disease amongst birds. House finches can suffer from it, as well as pine siskins, and therefore other sparrow species. So it's a good idea to take them down if you notice that the birds have. Generally, the beaks have growths in the eyes, and this is from and coming in to feed, and they're spreading the disease. Yeah. The other thing, one of the reasons we find that now on this part of the West Coast, we have bears that aren't hibernating, black bears. And black bears, unfortunately, get attracted to bird feeders big time. So at the moment, we are not feeding at our area. And it's midwinter, but it's luckily very mild. And that's one of the reasons the bears are still awake. They haven't gone, they haven't hibernated. And yeah, so that's another reason maybe you want to consider, if you're living in an area with bears still awake at this time of year, you might want to avoid feeding. Again, the birds really need the food, of course, as we said earlier, in the really cold weather. So you're feeding at this time, mild weather. It's really for me or you to observe them that we're feeding birds, not really. And it makes life easy for them too, of course. I mean, like all of us, birds are lazy, and if they can get a quick meal by coming to a feeder, they'll do it. That's quite happy, yeah. We would too.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Kevin. I appreciate that, and it's so true. I think once you start getting into, looking at nature and the animals and everything, you realize how everything really is connected. And it's sad to see that many bears this time of year, at least where we are, because it's not cold enough. Often the temperature kind of lets them know that it's time to go into hibernation, but because it's been so mild, that hasn't happened. I know in my neighborhood, we still have 2 active black bears that are, out and about at night. So yeah, but I really appreciate everything that you share with us, Kevin. It has been such an informative and engaging presentation, and everyone, thank you for your comments and suggestions. We are going to take those all into consideration because that helps us make better programming for you guys. And so we really appreciate every bit of feedback that you give us, good, bad, in the middle, anywhere. So thank you everyone for coming, for attending. We really appreciate this. And thank you so much. And we will be sending that email with the links right now. Leanne, if you want to say any closing remarks, that'd be awesome.
So just really appreciate everyone's participation, and hopefully we'll see you again online and possibly on site safely. Like Nicole mentioned, we have got the exhibit up, and so we do have the Nature House open 11 to 3 every weekend, Saturdays and Sundays. We also have totes and calendars and hoodies and t-shirts and cards and seeds for sale, and we'll have the nursery open, trying to get that open every weekend. So lots to come and see. People love coming to the trails as a safe place to come during these times. So,
and if you haven't seen that Coast Salish Birds calendar, that is also maybe a great way to start looking at birds and learning how to identify them, because in every month we have a little bit about that bird that you can learn about. And for me, it has been a huge help to really see birds up close and learn how to kind of identify them. So that is good. And thank you so much, Kevin. And everyone, have a great day, have a great weekend, and Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year.
Woohoo! Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.